George Kliavkoff, the former Pac-12 commissioner, he is infamously known as the man who sat and watched the demise of the Pac-12 as all these teams left to go to other conferences. He is getting pushed out after there are only two remaining teams. Now, Blake, I know that you disagree with me on this.
I do.
That you don't think it was his fault.
I'm not going to say that.
The initiation of it was not his fault. It was the previous Pac-12 commissioner whose name is escaping me.
Larry Scott.
It was on him for the way that he mishandled the initial talks on the contract expansion or the new contract. But I do have to give onus to Kliavkoff for not being active after everything that happened in order to create a brighter future. We were not in any of these rooms. We were not privy to any of these phone calls that might have happened with Washington State and Oregon State. But to sit and watch as these programs, these athletic directors have been bullish is pretty pathetic.
Okay. Let me give you a little bit of a history lesson. You ready?
Okay.
Larry Scott tried to move the Pac-12 more into Olympic sports. Okay. He tried to get TV revenue into more of the Olympic sport game and thought that is where a lot of money would be generated in that and in tennis, women's and men's tennis. That's what Larry Scott pushed for when he became the commissioner in 2009 of the Pac-12. He was the first one who signed the $100 million deal with ESPN on TV rights. He got pushed out because ESPN, CBS, and Fox would not give them more money for their programs, mainly due to the fact because it was a non-generator. It was a non-money generator because people just weren't viewing games because of how bad the Pac-12 was football-wise. I have my thoughts and theories on why the Pac-12 ultimately demised, mainly due to the fact because I think programs and coaches like Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Ryan Day, Brian Kelly, Ed Orgeron, who's your boy at Clemson? Dabo Swinney, all those dudes, Sarkisian, go into the state of California and grab all of the best talent for themselves. The reason they were losing football-wise was because the talent wasn't there. Kliavkoff comes into a situation, Joe, in a TV rights revenue that, if you remember, he came in there trying to, restructure TV contracts. Like that was the number one thing that he did.
And he failed.
Well, ESPN and Fox said no. And he said, okay. Remember, he tried to go to the CW. He tried to go to Apple. And they told him that Larry Scott signed the deal. Remember, it was this whole big thing about he was trying to rework the deal, and nobody knew that Larry Scott had secretly, when he was walking out of the door, big middle fingers to the Pac-12, had signed a deal for the next 10 years, with ESPN and Fox that doesn't generate the money that other conferences did. Why would ESPN and Fox change anything? When a contract had been signed, what kind of deal could he work? I think he wins.
Wait. Their contracts were coming up, though. That was what the biggest issue with all their contracts were expiring.
No, then why is ESPN and Fox having to pay the Pac-12 all of this money, and it's going to be generated and it's going to be given to Oregon State and Washington State? That's the only reason why all this is going, is because the Pac-12 is done with. He tried to restructure the deal, but Larry Scott had done the extension or signed the extension. Maybe it wasn't 10 years, maybe it was 5 years. But that was the reason why ESPN and Fox said no. This is an article from Ross Dellinger about Larry Scott talking about him signing the deal. As the last act as the Pac-12 commissioner, so it's a 5-year deal. Larry Scott signs a 5-year deal with ESPN and Fox worth $120 million a year.
But the deal ends in 2024, 2025. The biggest issue and the reason why this all goes on Kliavkoff is that there needed to be a renegotiation. Yes, what you're talking about with Larry Scott, that he set when this conversation needed to be had years prior, set them up for failure. But the overvaluing of the conference is what led to its death, was that Kliavkoff was trying to negotiate for an astronomically high number that they weren't going to get. There was this expectation that even if the teams are good and competitive, there is just not the same amount of eyeballs for the Big 12, Big 10, for the SEC, for them to be on par with any of those contracts. That's why I think it goes a lot on him, is that when this was coming down, there was a delusional decision by him in terms of what he was negotiating. And then after the fact, we've got opportunities here to figure out, maybe merge conferences, and he hasn't done shit.
But Kliavkoff did go to the presidents and universities and said, do you want to take this ESPN deal? And they said no. That was the whole reason for the move.
Well, at that point, I think that there was a lot of ulterior motives by those conferences.
That's not on him. That's not on him.
If he can't rally his troops and can't get his guys to stick together, that is on him.
We talked about Fox and ESPN coming up with these TV deals. They are the reason why all these schools in the Pac-12 left and went to the Big Ten.
That's lame on his part for getting pushed around that easily.
I just don't know what you wanted him to do when ESPN and Fox are already
not get dicked over.
Joe, Larry,
you think Greg Sankey would get dicked over this easily if this happened to him?
Greg Sankey legitimately had Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and LSU constantly winning. And by the way, throwing this out here, had the highest ranked TV revenue because of viewership.
But I'm just talking about from like a personality standpoint. Greg Sankey's not getting his ass kicked this easily. I just think that Kliavkoff was just this complete nothing presence that just watched everything happen and kind of was not active. Be more aggressive. He just was okay with everything. That's my problem.
You know what?
The reason why this
died.
George
Kliavkoff, you know what he had to do? Let me give it a scenario. They sent George Kliavkoff into a situation where a house was on fire, okay, and you wanted to go, okay, and try to go to the homeowner and pull their fire insurance away from him.
No. The house was on fire. He walked in the living room and he sat down. He sat down in the living room and just kind of checked out. That was what he did.
So you're going to put all of the Pac-12's issues on one man that got there in
two men, him and Larry Scott. It's the both of them.
Larry, you need to put this all on Larry Scott. This ain't got nothing to do with Kliavkoff.
It's got plenty to do with him. I also look, at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense for Washington State and Oregon State to keep him around because their best interests do not align with his. Their best interests are remaining in a competitive playing field, and his is to try and get the Pac-12 back to a profitable status. They're two completely different priorities. It doesn't make sense. They also should not be spending the money on paying a guy like this to run a conference that's non-existent.
I just, Joe, I don't know what you want him to do. Like, I mean,
be a bitch.
Okay, well, what if everything would have gone right, what would he have done? If ESPN Fox say no, what do you want him to do? If he goes to the university and says ESPN and Fox are offering this and they say no, what is he supposed to do?
I'd be more proactive in renegotiating.
The market is what it is. Joe, let me tell you something. You live on the West Coast, so you see a lot more than I do.
Yeah.
So ask me how many games I watch of the Pac-12 at night.
None.
Well, I do because I have to cover it to be on this show. Before I covered the Pac-12, I'm going to be honest with you. I ain't watching it. It's too late. There was no viewership. They weren't winning anything. Hold on. You know how they would have gotten a better TV revenue?
What? How?
if they would have won.
Well, okay, so there's very low likelihood of them being a national championship contending conference. Now, this was a year that they were really competitive. It was the most competitive that they've ever been, which is why it's ironic. There is not going to be as much viewership in the Pac-12 as there are going to be other parts of the country, just because of the geographical divide of, if we look at the Western states compared to all the high populated cities that are on the East Coast. There's really not as many on the West Coast as there is on the East Coast, and that's where all the teams are. That's not going to happen. But to not be able to get these teams to understand their market value, and for them to allow them to operate independently, and for them to go make their own decisions, to allow USC, UCLA to go make their own decisions, all of these things to happen, means that he did not command the room or the respect of the other athletic directors, the presidents of these schools, all of that stuff. That's what I'm saying, is that if he could not command the respect of those people in order to make the right decisions, it's all about, and that's why I brought up Greg Sankey, it's all about rallying the troops and rallying everybody in the right direction. You could tell during this whole thing, everybody had their own best interest in mind. And that to me means there's a lack of leadership. And I have to point to the guy that was leading when the ship went down. I have to.
I agree with this. Chance Babin says the Pac got outsmarted by the Big 12, who got media rights done ahead of them.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.